In my last painting video, I fully reimagined some of my old Drukhari models, stripping and repainting them. With the bases, I saw an opportunity to try a technique that I've been wanting to try for some time, marble-style tiling using dry baby wipe. Let's get into it. I wanted to try a variety of materials and techniques here, so I'll start with the tile material. I plan to use green stuff, milliput, and then a blend of the two that some people call grilliput. In the end, I didn't have enough green stuff to use that on its own, but it actually ended up working out okay, for reasons we'll come to later. Whichever material I was using, the method was the same. I took a small amount, rolled it into a ball, and then squished it onto the base. To get this as flat and smooth as possible, I used some greaseproof paper and a paintbrush as a rolling pin. The paper is smooth and doesn't stick, so it helps it to stay free of any texture. Now I started with the nearest brush I had to hand, which had a bit of a taper on it, and it took me a good few before I just decided a non-tapered cylinder would be much easier to use. I am not a smart man. After it was a thin, mostly even layer, I wanted to press it down hard with an even surface. I kept the paper and either pushed it against the table or sometimes used the side of this set square. I don't know why I changed the method up really, it made literally no difference, either was as good as the other. I guess I just got bored. Now I had a flat surface ready for the tile designs. Eldar always have these curved natural shapes, and dark Eldar, Drukhari, have that plus lots of spikes and edges. So my first two tools were a straight and a curved thing to imprint with. I used a set square for straight and the rim of a base for curved. If this works well, I'll use different sized bases so I have different angles of curve as well. I got this by cutting the base away with a super sharp knife, which at this point also solves the mystery of why I'm wearing a plaster in this video. Be careful with knives, people. Remember, I make these mistakes so you don't have to. So I got to carefully making shapes, keeping in mind that I needed a lot of narrow angles and spiky bits to get that evil look. At this point, I'd just like to mention, if you follow the link tree down below, you'll see my other socials. There's also a link to my Patreon and Ko-fi, where I'd massively appreciate if you feel it in your heart to give me any kind of support. It'll all go to helping improve the channel and the videos I make. Next, I went to my bits box for more ways to tie it into the faction. The Raider and Ravager kits have these shock prow kind of things. They have a raised Drukhari symbol on them, and there's a few different ones, so I thought these would be perfect to stamp into the tiles. I cut off the unneeded parts and then added the symbols where it would look good. I also took out this random blade bit from some vehicle sprue to use as a stamp. Finally, I used my knife to cut the excess off the edges of the bases. I went through each step for a single base, finishing before starting on the next. For the first few, I used milliput. This is easier to sand smooth once it's cured than green stuff is, but it can be difficult to get smooth sculpting results. It can kind of crack and has a weird texture sometimes. You also have to be careful because it's water soluble, so using that on tools can kind of disintegrate it a little bit. However, I do find it more usable for simple jobs with less sculpting, and I also use it when I can because it's cheaper. The next ones are done with a 50-50 mix. This combines the smoother sculpting ability of green stuff with being able to sand it of milliput. This is the mixture I preferred for this job, so going forward, this is the one I'll use. So good to try this out. I did want to try some with like quite a rough texture as well as some smooth ones. To do this, I bunched up some tin foil a few times to get it really wrinkled and then rolled it over the top, creating little rough divots and texture. On some bases, I kind of picked edges out and kind of pulled it apart a bit so it looked like the tiles had been damaged. I wanted to look like wherever this place is has seen a terrible time using this and some later methods. I went through 10 test bases in this sitting and then left them to cure. Once the tiles cured, I needed to smooth the tiles to be fully flat, so I sanded them down with a sandpaper on a flat surface. This is where I realised the green stuff would have been more difficult anyway, as the stamping process will always push some material up and out, meaning it would have needed to be sanded. Green stuff just doesn't sand as smooth, it kind of gets a scratchy texture, so this worked out well. I also sanded the edges to look in line with the base. Right, so that's my basic tile design. There is more to go on top of the base, but the painting technique does need the surface to be flat, so they'll go on later. For my colour choice, I wanted to contrast the warm colour of my Drukhari, so I settled on Citadel, Sons of Horus Green, and Game Colour Turquoise. I primed them black and then wet blended, watering them down a bit so they get this kind of like cloudy look in with the black and the two different shades of green. I did this over several layers to build up the effect. Next we'll get to the main bit of the method. I took a dry baby wipe and teased it out pulling it slowly apart to expand so that there were regular gaps in the strands. I pulled this taut over the base and then twisted it at the back so it was easier to hold and would stay still. With Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White in the airbrush, I sprayed the base. If you try this, one big tip I can give is spray strictly from one fixed angle, i.e. directly above. If you try and get more area by varying in the angle of the base or moving the airbrush around it too much, it'll blur everything and just look messy where the paint's kind of come in around the fibres. I gave it a second to dry a bit and then carefully removed the baby white. You just need to remove it directly upwards and kind of peel it carefully so you don't slide it around the base, which would smudge the design. And it's that easy. They just look awesome like this. It took a little while to work out the consistency, because if you don't pull it apart enough, then you get barely any white on there. If you pull it apart too much, it's just a white base with like one blue line, so it definitely took a bit of back and forth. I followed this up with a watered down Drakhari Nightshade wash and a very, very light dry brush with white to create further definition. I then used a gloss varnish on the smooth tiles. Before the other details, I used Storm Vermin Fur on the parts underneath the tiles where the little gaps were made. This is meant to look like some kind of like dirt or some kind of material underneath it. Now, to add in the further details, starting with some rocky rubble. I pre-painted this by simply mixing some basing sand in with Citadel Sea Grey. If you're going to try this, just add the paint in slowly and keep it moving as it dries. Just stir it in very slowly a bit at a time. If any bits attach as the paint dries, then just mix them until they come apart. I tried a different method for attaching these, arranging them first and then dropping thin PVA glue onto them. The surface tension of the water just kind of rearranged them, so this wasn't particularly worthwhile. Perhaps I'll try with isopropyl alcohol next time so there's no surface tension. I then put some PVA glue in between the tiles and the cracks and added some grass. Once these were done, I dropped more PVA glue over them to really bond them into place. Next, I tried this product I just got, Dirty Down Moss Effect. You put it on, then feather the edges with a brush or cotton bud. You can reactivate it with water so you can keep playing around with it. Overall, I ended up using too much because I was trying various methods, so in the future I'll keep it sparing. It kind of made it look like the marble was blue and green, in my opinion, rather than just little mossy patches. And here we see the idiot in his natural habitat. Having forgotten to shade the rubble before adding grass and moss, he carefully shades around those parts, trying not to mess the whole thing up, working hard not to cause a mess that would have been easily avoided if he'd just done this step first. So yeah, these rocks needed a quick shade, should have done that before the grass, completely forgot it. Finally, I took Blood for the Blood God by Citadel and made little blood puddles and spatters and stuff in a few places, just to show these Drukhari weren't slacking off. I filled in the rims with model colour Luftwaffe uniform and then I was done. So just to recap, if you follow this video along, shade the rubble before putting the other terrain bits down, then glaze the marble after sealing everything. Finally finish with the moss and blood at the end of that. Got it? Yeah, simple, right? So I already recorded this once, but I forgot to turn on the mic, so I'm just going to have to do it again. I've actually attached some Hellions to these now, so never mind. So, what do we think? I am not as much a fan of the rough texture. Marble is quite often in this nice smooth kind of thing, so it just looks nicer. I think I shaded and dry brushed it a bit much, so I've lost some of the details. So if you follow this along, like you can see there's still an okay amount, but you would want to make sure that that stays looking very cool and marbly. For the moss, I definitely used too much because I was experimenting with it. It looks kind of like it just is a bit green, so in future I'll be using it a lot more sparingly. Most of the tile patterns I am fairly happy with, to be honest. This one maybe looks a bit... No, those shapes kind of look a bit Tyranid, kind of, because of like Tyranid spiky bits. But yeah, in general, I'll try and do more cohesive things with all the curves and stuff. The stamps were awesome. They're a bit like concave, so I'll probably file off these corners so that they work better next time. Using the set square as the straight bit made the gaps just a little bit too thick, so I will stick to using this in future. Definitely going to be chopping a few more base rims to vary that up. And this, it was fine. I probably won't bother using it again. Now, one thing I do really like is the grass coming up between the cracks. I think that looks really awesome, so I'll definitely do that. But yeah, generally I'll do a bit less detail on the base so the marble is left to stand out a bit more in future ones. And also I'm going to put a list on the screen now, because obviously I was experimenting and I realised what order I'd like to do things in as I went. So yeah, it's probably, you're probably sitting there thinking, I've got no idea how I'd do this. So as always, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. If you like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.